Welcome back. This is Bernardi. I've got a swag of mail coming in from all of you. Let's cover them off. I'm delighted to say that Liberal Senator Hollie Hughes is joining me. Hollie, fantastic to have you on the show, as always. Should we get straight into it? I've got Catherine.
Lovely to see you, Corey.
Who says, how do we stop... It's good to see you. How do we stop net zero policies ruining the agriculture sector and destroying our quality of life? This is a great question because not too many people know the answer.
Well, what's particularly interesting about it, and I think this is where we need to really start to have a look as we get down into what the government's called their safeguard mechanism around their now legislated 43% emissions. Because one of the ways that we can look at emissions reduction is through carbon capture and storage. And agriculture has a real role to play in that. But there is an ideological objection to this carbon capture storage by the Labor Party and the Greens. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with in their safeguard mechanism, what the attitude is toward carbon capture and storage, and whether or not we can encourage and actually use our agricultural land to be part of the solution, because they're where the trees are. They are the ones planting things and bringing carbon back into the soil, which is actually good for crops going forward. So when we look at agriculture, we kind of get a little bit moved with this stupid methane stuff they go on to and the attacks on cattle. But there's a lot of broadacre farming in crops that can actually be used to actually sequester carbon into the soils.
Yeah, but Hollie, surely the priority has to be, we've got to feed ourselves, we've got to clothe ourselves, we've got to look after our exports.
Corey,
this has got to be much more important than running on some methane.
That's a whole other question. Look, mate, that's a whole other question. But the question is, how can the agricultural sector participate? They can actually participate and probably make some money from it because they can actually capture carbon. Do I think we need a methane tax? Absolutely not. Do I think some of this stuff is ridiculous? Did I agree with legislating 43%? No, I didn't, but we're stuck with it. But what we do need to make sure is that we are providing, if we are in this policy environment, and, you know, as one of your co-hosts said this week, according to the pundits, we'll have an Albanese government for the next 32 years. God help us all. But we do need to find ways through this if this is what we're going to be continually subjected to. But agriculture can play a role in carbon capture, sequestering of that carbon and storage of carbon, and actually produce income back off farms, because, you know, that's what we need to secure, because we don't want all our agricultural land to have wind farms and solar farms.
Here. And Hollie, we need the money. We need the money because Jan says, why are we about to spend $1.4 billion overseas in a debt crisis? This is going to the Pacific Islands, you know, the ones that we're about to sell out to China. Suddenly, the begging bowl, they get filled up. What do you make of that?
Look, I was listening to you and Erin just before and around some of the discussion, and Erin saying, you know, I don't really understand. Whose belt's tightening? Are we spending money? Are we not spending money? What's happening? Because the reality is the budget is not actually in as bad a shape as the Labor Party would have you believe. We actually have the fourth lowest deficit in the past 14 years, and lower than all but one of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. But the Labor Party isn't going to tell you that. So even with COVID, even with Ukraine, everything else, the budget is actually not in as bad a shape as the Labor Party would have you believe. But what is important is how they spend it, whether it's welfare, whether it's overseas, whether it's infrastructure, or whatever they are doing. It is how they are spending it, which is what we are going to be looking at. But you look at Jim Chalmers and he can barely spit out.
I'm sorry I've got to cut you off, but I'm up against a hard break.
The commodity prices are.
Thank you, because I've got to go.
Okay.
Hollie Hughes, you are a star. You've made some really good points tonight. I'm sorry I'm out of time. But at home, I'm out of the time for you too, Bernardi. It's all over for this week. Come in.